Welcome to The Book of Life, a show about Jewish books, music, film, and web. I'm Heidi Estrin. The Book of Life is a podcast service of the Feldman Library at Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton, Florida. Additional support comes from the Association of Jewish Libraries. Wherever You Go is a novel about three very different Americans in Jerusalem, what brings them and what they do there, and how their experiences intertwine. I spoke to author Joan Leegant when she visited Boca Raton for a Jewish Book Network event at the Levis JCC. Joan Leegant, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
So Joan, we're here to talk about your book, Wherever You Go. And the first thing I wanted to ask you was to tell us about the title, Wherever You Go. It makes me think of that line from Buckaroo Banzai, wherever you go, there you are.
Oh, right.
So what does it mean to you?
It comes from the book of Ruth, which is mentioned at the beginning of the book. Wherever you go, I will go. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. It's a expression of loyalty, and it's an expression of kind of unconditional loyalty. And I find that interesting because in the book, people pledge themselves and align themselves to others and to certain causes, including a land, a God. I mean, this kind of loyalty expands across the book to religious issues and so forth. So it came from the book of Ruth originally. It's a little bit of a shading of it, though, because the loyalty that my characters pledge, I'm examining in part how far people will go in the name of that kind of loyalty. And then on another level, the book is about people who, wherever they go, they take their lives with them. They take their baggage, their emotional and psychological and other baggage. So it plays on that level as well.
So the book is set in Israel, but all three of these main characters are Americans.
Correct.
So can you talk a little bit about how you see the relationship between American Jews and Israel, maybe your own relationship and your character's relationship?
And I'll first back up for a second and say when I decided to write a novel about Israel, and I start my stories, any of my fiction, just with characters, and the plot emerges from the characters and the situation. All I knew was that I wanted to write a book about Israel, and I wanted to write about Americans in Israel, because I'm really interested in what Americans do when they go there. The relationship is interesting. It's very complex. It's very mixed. Israel is a little bit, it's like a Rorschach test for people. That is, you come and you project whatever it is. You know, people project different things. American Jews from everywhere project different things onto Israel for them. And I think that's a little bit of what you see in this book. For one character, a young kid named Aaron, it's a place for him to sort of deal with some of his emotional issues with his father and his need to feel like he belongs, and he finds himself a place on the fringe, this sort of extremist right-wing fringe in Israel. So he projects that. For the other character, Mark Greenglass, who becomes religious later in his life, he goes to Israel to teach. Israel is a religious homeland. And the woman in the book, Yona Stern, she goes there to make amends with a sister, but Israel becomes a place for her where she achieves some kind of internal peace. So for each person individually in the story, Israel kind of plays a different role. On the larger question of Israel and the American Jewish community, that's a big question. Yeah. I can say a few things.
Sure, if you have a generalization that you think is fair.
My hopes, after I wrote the book and I saw what I had written, my hope is that it will provide the American Jews who read it with a fuller and more nuanced picture of what Israel is today, including aspects and forces at work in the society that we may not read about that much here or know that much about, and that I think that are worrisome in terms of Israel as a democracy and the types of things that people in Israel talk about all the time.
Okay, that's interesting. The character, Aaron, is a young man who ends up, as you said, joining a radical movement and blowing up a building.
Right.
And he feels really terrible about the violence afterwards. And he feels foolish because he kind of chose the wrong target.
Right.
If he had chosen the right target, would he have felt justified? Would he have felt like a hero?
That's a really great question. I think my own reading on him is that he would not. He was a kid with issues, obviously. Mm-hmm. I think if he had the similar consequences, he would have felt just as bad. I think the fact that it was the wrong building, made him it just compounded his sense of being a failure in life. But I think that once he was confronted with the reality of what his ideology, or his very sort of shallow embrace of the ideology, led him to, he would have had just as much regret.
Yeah, it was interesting to see his reaction to actually performing violence versus his ideas about it before it actually was real.
Right, and you've hit on something that nobody has mentioned, and I'm glad you did, because that was very important to me. This whole idea, you can posture, you can walk around, you can strut, you can say, you can advocate, but when it comes down to really doing, crossing that line and committing a violent act that has real consequences that can result in death and in all kinds of dreadful things, that's a far cry from just espousing violence or adhering to a certain kind of cause. And this is one of the things that interests me in this book, is just how far people are willing to take this and to recognize how serious the consequences are of advocating certain things or speaking in certain ways.
It seems to me that your three main characters, Aaron, Yonah, and Mark, have all come to Israel to kind of try to find meaning in their lives, or maybe create meaning in their lives. Do you believe that somebody's location is an essential part of that search for meaning? And in your opinion, do American Jews need to visit Israel?
I think you can find meaning anywhere. Israel has a special meaning for Jews, obviously, so it carries its own set of optional meanings, like we were saying at the beginning. Could mean lots of different things for lots of people. Do I think all American Jews should visit Israel? Was that your question? Should visit, yeah. Well, I don't usually traffic in the word should, but I think that it's an opportunity. I think it would be enriching for a lot of people and positive for a lot of people if they did. Certainly anybody who's interested in the modern history of modern Jewry altogether, really, I guess I'd put the word should visit Israel and learn something about the country, because it is very rich but very complex. I think that one of the advantages of visiting, and if one visits with an open mind and reads a lot and learns a lot about the country, is that when you visit, you can also get beyond just what you may have learned when you're here. It's a very complex society, and there's a lot to see and a lot to learn. So I think it can only benefit somebody.
The Yiddish Book Center, on their website, there was a review highlighting an interesting line from the book. And the line was, "We have a choice between truth and ease, but we can never have both." So
right.
Why do you think these two things are mutually exclusive?
Well, that's a line that the character murmurs, and I think it's from Emerson.
Okay.
And it came in the context of this young man remembering this woman who murmurs, his former lover, who tells him this, that she was one of these people who just refused to whitewash any kinds of truths in the world. It didn't have anything to do with Israel in that context. It's just someone who said, you have to be out in the world with your eyes always open. Actually, the line from Emerson is, we have a choice between truth and repose. But I thought repose was a little too obscure a word for most of us, and myself included. But it's an interesting line that you picked, and I had forgotten that reviewer had picked it too. The point Emerson, I think, was making was that life is full of things that make you that don't let you off the hook. You can't just relax and rest easy. That there's a lot of things about which to be concerned, worried, stay up late, not sleep, that kind of thing.
So the truth is always complicated.
Yeah.
So, 'cause I hadn't remembered the context of the quote, and it seems to certainly fit, the book as a whole.
It does. You're absolutely right. I hadn't either, and because I only thought of it in the context in which it, came up when I wrote it. But you're right. That's a very good way of me thinking about the book. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I like that.
You're welcome.
I like that.
You've gotten glowing reviews in the American press, and I was wondering if the book has been read much in Israel and what the response of Israeli readers has been.
Mm-hmm. What I have found was very interesting, that Israeli readers, these were people who were reading in English, so they'd be native English speakers, but they're long-term Israelis, were very both interested in the subject matter, not at all defensive about it, because the issue of Jewish religious and political extremism is in the press every single day in Israel.
Is there any particular difference that stands out between the American response and the Israeli response to the book?
There are a lot of people here who have said they had no idea, extremist groups, Jewish extremism, that it exists. People would say they had heard that every now and then there might be one person who did something, like Baruch Goldstein way back, or the assassination of Rabin, let's say. They might say, well, they've heard that there are some sort of extremist ideology out there and some people, but they were not aware that it's as influential and as serious as it is. That's news, I think, to a lot of American Jewish readers. And that's a big difference in Israel, because in Israel people are aware of this, partly because if you are a soldier or you are of the family of a soldier serving in the West Bank, you hear about all kinds of things. You're also very aware in Israel, mainstream Israelis, unless they totally subscribe to the right, are very frustrated by the amount of resources and money and army personnel that goes to supporting the settlements and the settlement activity. So this is very much constantly discussed in the press. I think a lot of American Jews simply don't know that much about it. There's one other difference, that I think there have been some people who have been uncomfortable in the American Jewish community with a book that addresses this issue, because people don't want to read about the sort of more problematic aspects of Israeli life or of Jewish life. I view it as not a criticism of Israel or a criticism of Jewish life. I'm a Zionist. I love Israel. I live there part of the year. And to me, it's not that it's a criticism. It's shining a light on a phenomenon that exists that we should know about. And because I think that it's very dangerous for the future of Israel. So if people are uncomfortable, I hope that they will read the book with an open mind and recognize that we need to come to terms with the fact that this exists, that there is a right-wing, very extremist movement, in Israel that needs to be seen and understood.
So you write about causes a lot and people's dedication. So are you involved in any particular causes?
No, and I think one of the reasons that it came up was that my experience, I think it was a very pivotal experience when I did go to college. This was not only the heyday of the feminist movement, it was Vietnam, and I went to college where, my classes were canceled, there were demonstrations on campus. The seeds of this book are partly back then, that question of watching people commit themselves to movements. I admire that kind of passion. I admire it even when I don't necessarily agree with the cause, but I admire that passion. And I'm not that type of person. I'm a cautious person. I'm kind of curious about people who do that kind of thing in their lives. And I also forgot until this very moment that my father's family were all socialists, and not my father. My father was a very mild-mannered accountant, but we had relatives. I had uncles who marched with Martin Luther King, and my father's family were all these socialists. Some of them went to jail, and so this whole idea of aligning with a cause and doing something larger than just one's own self has always been kicking around in the back of my head. When I paired it up with the Israel question, over the years of spending time in Israel, the question of a cause has worried me, because the people who in this book that are holding the banner of a cause are also committing acts that are very frightening. It's like a push and pull between the admiration for a cause and the dangers of a cause. And this is sort of where this book is struggling. And
I was going to ask you for your elevator pitch, but you just did it. So
the elevator pitch?
That's a good elevator pitch.
What do you mean?
An elevator pitch is when, if you step into an elevator with somebody and they say, oh, tell me about your book, and you only have a minute before they get to their floor. You have to quickly say something snappy. Yeah. So you just came up with it.
I like the way you put it. Yeah, I have to have something, but it's not as good as what you just helped me with. Absolutely. You're right. That's very good. Thank you. And I will say one other thing, that I've been very, very happy that people have been so receptive to the book. Not just because you hope that people will read your book because you want to publish another one and selfish reasons, but also because I feel that people really care about Israel a lot. And the book has been read by people who are not Jewish as well, and are reading it with a very open mind. A couple people have asked me, what if people aren't Jewish? How are they going to read this book? Equally interested, equally open-minded, and because there's a universal aspect to this book. This whole notion of religious extremism is all over our planet. Yeah. What draws people to it is something we all might want to ask. It's in every country. So I've been very happy that people are interested in it and that it's been read closely and carefully. And it's very gratifying, especially when you sit alone for 7 years working on a book by yourself. It's very nice.
Yeah. Well, Joan Leegant, thank you so much.
Thank you. Pleasure to speak with you and meet you in person.
Yeah. There are so many ways to connect with the Book of Life. Fan us at facebook.com/Book of Life Podcast. Follow us at twitter.com/Book of Life Pod. Email us at bookoflifepodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 561-206-2473. You can also listen to the latest episode by phone at 916-313-3820. And of course, find links to everything at bookoflifepodcast.com. The Book of Life is a podcast service of the Feldman Library at Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton, Florida, at cbiboca.org, and is supported in part by the Association of Jewish Libraries at jewishlibraries.org. Our background music is provided by the Freilach Makers Klezmer String Band at freilachmakers.com. Thanks for listening, and happy reading.